Let's talk about the endocrine part 1. So first, we have chemical messengers. So these are the ones who's responsible for the communication of cells inside our body in order to regulate our body activities. So there are 4 classes of chemical messengers. First is the autocrine. Autocrine is a chemical messenger that binds the autocrine receptors on that same cell, leading to changes in the cell. So in other words, it stimulates on the same cell it's secreted from. Next is the paracrine. So basically, it is a chemical messenger secreted by a cell and affects a nearby cell of a different type. Or in other words, it alerts the behavior of that cell. Next is the neurotransmitter. So it is a chemical messenger that activates another neuron, muscle cell, or glandular cell. Meaning, it stimulates your or our body's response to allow us to act or react to different stressors. And lastly, the endocrine. It is a chemical messenger that is transmitted into the blood to change the activity of distant target cells. So let us now move on to the endocrine system. And here are the main functions of the endocrine system. So one of the main functions is metabolism, in which the endocrine system regulates the rate of nutrient utilization and energy production. Next one is the control of food intake and digestion. So in other words, the endocrine system regulates the level of fullness and the breakdown of food into individual nutrients. Next is the tissue development. So the endocrine system influences the development of tissues such as those of the nervous system. Another function is ion regulation, meaning the endocrine system helps regulate blood acid level as well as blood concentrations in our body. Next is the water balance, meaning the endocrine system controls the solute concentration of the blood. Another function is heart rate and blood pressure regulation. For example, your heart rate is fast or your blood pressure is high. So the endocrine system will send hormones to help regulate your fast heart rate or high blood pressure. Next is the control of glucose and other nutrients, meaning the endocrine system regulates the levels of glucose and other nutrients in the blood. Next is the control of reproductive functions. So the endocrine system controls the development and functions of the reproductive systems in males and females. Another function is uterine contractions and milk release. So meaning the endocrine system regulates uterine contractions during delivery and stimulates milk release from the breasts in lactating females. And lastly is the immune system regulation, meaning the endocrine system helps to control the production of immune cells. So endocrine system is a messenger system comprising feedback loops of the hormones released by internal glands and cell into the circulatory system to regulate the body. So basically, this let hormones travel to cells in other part of the body to help the way our organs work. And now, let us discuss hormones. Hormones travel in the blood looking for target cells, and those target cells have receptors that the hormones fit into, like a key. And there are 2 chemical natures of hormones. First is lipid. Soluble hormones, these are nonpolar, meaning It can diffuse across cell membrane. And lastly is water. Soluble hormones, these are polar, meaning hormones are able to dissolve in plasma and circulate through the bloodstream until they reach their target cells.
There are three types of stimuli regulating the hormone released. They are humoral stimuli, neural stimuli, and hormonal stimuli. Let's talk about humoral stimuli first. The term humoral is derived from the term humor, which refers to bodily fluids such as blood. A humor stimulus refers to the control of hormone release in response to changes in extracellular fluids, such as blood or the iron concentration in the blood. For example, a rise in blood glucose levels triggers the pancreatic release of insulin. Insulin causes blood glucose levels to drop, which signals the pancreas to stop producing insulin in a negative feedback loop. The stimulation here would be the insulin and the inhibition would be glucagon. Let's talk about how insulin and glucagon works together. Insulin works during digestions. Foods that contain carbohydrates are converted into glucose. Most of this glucose is sent into our bloodstreams, causing a rise in blood glucose levels, which signals your pancreas to produce insulin. The insulin tells cells throughout your body to take in glucose from your bloodstream. As the glucose moves into your cells, your blood glucose levels go down. Some cells use glucose as energy. Other cells, such as your liver and muscles, store any excess glucose as a substance called glycogen, which is used for fuel between meals. Now, glucagon works to counterbalance the actions of insulin. About 4 to 6 hours after you eat, the glucose levels in your blood decrease. This triggers your pancreas to produce glucagon. This hormone signals your liver and muscle cells to convert the stored glycogen back into glucose. These cells then release the glucose into your bloodstream so your other cells can use it for energy. This whole feedback loop with insulin and glucagon is constantly in motion. It keeps our blood sugar levels from dipping too low, ensuring that our body has a steady supply of energy. In some cases, the nervous system directly stimulates endocrine glands to release hormones, which is referred to as neural stimuli. Recall that in a short stress response, the hormones epinephrine and norepinephrine are important for providing the burst of energy required for the body to respond. Here, neural signaling from the sympathetic nervous system directly stimulates the adrenal medulla to release the hormones epinephrine and norepinephrine in response to stress. The stimulation in neural stimuli is the epinephrine neuropeptide, the chemical messenger secreted by neurons directly to blood, and the releasing hormones, specialized neuropeptides that stimulate hormone secretion from the other endocrine cells. Inhibition: neurons inhibit target by releasing inhibitory neurotransmitter, causing the target endocrine gland to not secrete its hormone. The last type of stimuli regulating the hormone released is the hormonal stimuli. It refers to the release of a hormone in response to another hormone. A number of endocrine glands release hormones when stimulated by hormones released by the other endocrine glands. For example, the hypothalamus produces hormones that stimulate the anterior portion of the pituitary gland. The anterior pituitary in turn released hormones that regulate hormone production by the other endocrine gland. The anterior pituitary released the thyroid stimulating hormone, which is known as TSH, which then stimulates the thyroid gland to produce the hormones T3 and T4. As blood concentrations of T3 and T4 rise, They inhibit both pituitary and the hypothalamus in a negative feedback loop. The stimulation in hormonal stimuli would be the trophic hormones of anterior pituitary gland, which is the TSH, and TSH will stimulate the thyroid gland to produce the hormones T3 and T4. T3 is the hormone triiodothyronine and T4 is the hormone thyroxine. T3 and T4 are secreted into the bloodstreams to regulate the body's metabolism. These hormones are essential to the growth of the body, and T3 and T4 act on almost every cell, increasing the metabolic rate, affecting protein synthesis, and regulating bone growth. The inhibition in hormonal stimuli is inhibiting hormones from hypothalamus prevent the secretion of trophic hormones. The possible inhibition would be the RT3, or known as reversed T3. Reverse T3 or RT3 is a byproduct of T4 metabolism and is the inactive form of T3, that is, cannot carry out the same metabolic activities as T3. RT3 is thought to elevate when a person is critically ill as a means of conserving precious energy. Major mechanisms that maintain hormone levels in blood are the negative feedback and positive feedback. Negative feedback loop is a one way that the endocrine system tries to keep homeostasis or the stability in the body. If an endocrine gland senses that there is too much of one hormone in the body, it will initiate changes to decrease production of that hormone. And if there's not enough of the hormone, the body will increase production of that hormone. We can think of it as our body's attempt to self-regulate and self-correct. For example, if you set the thermostat in your home to 75 degrees, your heat will run until your temperature gets to 75 degrees and then it will turn off. If it gets cooler in the room and drops below 75 degrees, your heat will turn back on to return the room to 75 degrees, then turn off once it succeeds. This will continue to happen as long as your thermostat is set to 75 degrees. The endocrine system works similarly to the thermostat, but with our hormones. The 75 degree represents our body's preferred levels of different hormones. Positive feedback loop in the endocrine system is more rare. It only happens on some hormones. It happens when the release of a hormone initiates actions that lead to an additional release of that hormone. And like the negative feedback loop, the positive feedback loop is not looking to reach homeostasis. An example for the positive feedback loop is the oxytocin. Oxytocin is released on both childbirth and breastfeeding. Once the oxytocin is released, it causes additional release of oxytocin. During childbirth, release of oxytocin results in uterine contractions, and uterine contractions causes additional oxytocin to be released. The release of oxytocin only stops after childbirth, and during the breastfeeding, oxytocin is released, which allows for milk ejection. Milk ejection causes more oxytocin to be released, and again, oxytocin only stop being released when the breastfeeding stops. Receptors are the proteins where the hormones bind. Receptor site the location on cell where hormone binds. Each characteristics allow only a specific type of hormone to bind it. Specifically, the tendency for each type of hormone to bind to one type of receptor. There are two classes of receptors. They are nuclear receptors and membrane-bound receptors. Nuclear receptors are acting as transcription factors in the cell nucleus. They regulate gene expression of hormonal regulated target genes. It binds to lipophilic hormones produced by the organism's endocrine system, which links the secretion of hormones directly to regulation of gene expression of responsive tissues. It cannot respond immediately because it takes time to produce mRNA and the protein, the hormone response elements, found in receptors that bind to DNA, and DNA is the binding domain that enables them to bind to hormone response element of target genes. The transcription factor forms from combination of hormone and its receptors. The hormone receptor complex activate genes, which in turn activate the DNA to produce mRNA, and the mRNA or messenger RNA increases the synthesis of certain proteins that produce the target cell's response. Membrane-bound receptors are proteins that extend across the cell membrane where water-soluble hormones bind, with hormone binding sites exposed on cell membrane's outer surface. Since lipid-insoluble hormones do not directly affect the target cells because they cannot enter the cell and act directly on DNA, binding on these hormones to a cell surface receptors results in activation of a signaling pathway. This triggers intracellular activity and carries out the specific effects associated with the hormone. In this way, nothing passes through the cell membrane. The hormone that binds at the surface remains at the surface of the cell, while the intracellular product remains inside the cell. The hormone that initiates the signal pathway is called a first messenger, which activates a second messenger in the cytoplasm. One of the very important second messenger is the cyclic AMP. When a hormone binds to its membrane receptor, a G protein that is associated with the receptor is activated. G proteins are proteins separate from receptors that are found in the cell membrane. When a hormone is not bound to the receptor, the G protein is inactive and is bound to guanosine diphosphate or GDP. When a hormone binds to the receptor, the G protein is activated by binding guanosine diphosphate or GDP in place of GDP. After binding, GDP is hydrolyzed by the G protein into GDP and becomes inactive. The activated G protein in turn activates a membrane-bound enzyme called adenylyl cyclase. Adenylyl cyclase catalyzes the conversion of ATP to C-AMP or cyclic AMP. Cyclic AMP in turn activates a group of proteins called protein kinases, which transfers a phosphate group from ATP to a substrate molecule in a process called phosphorylation. The phosphorylation of a substrate molecule changes its structural orientation, thereby activating it. These activated molecules can mediate changes in cellular processes. The binding of a hormone at a single receptor causes the activation of many G proteins, which activates adenylyl cyclase. With each molecule of adenylyl cyclase then triggers the formation of many molecules of cyclic AMP. Further amplification occurs as a protein kinases, once activated by cyclic AMP, can catalyze many reactions. In this way, a small amount of hormone can trigger the formation of a large amount of cellular product. The second messenger systems act rapidly because they act on already existing enzymes. They have a signal amplification, which means that a single hormone activates many second messengers, each of which activates enzymes that produce enormous amounts of final product. Pituitary gland is a small pea-sized gland located at the base of the brain, below the hypothalamus. It sits in its own little chamber under the brain known as the sella turcica, a part of the endocrine system, and is in charge of making several essential hormones. The pituitary gland also tells other endocrine system glands to release hormones. The pituitary sends signals to organs and glands via its hormones and tell them what functions are needed and when. The right settings for our body depend on several factors including age and sex. Pituitary gland is divided into two major divisions, and they are anterior pituitary and posterior pituitary. Anterior pituitary gland releases hormones in response to hormones secreted from the hypothalamus. The hormones released by the hypothalamus into the anterior pituitary are either releasing hormones that stimulate the secretion or synthesis of hormones, or inhibiting hormones that inhibit the synthesis or secretions of hormones. In response, the anterior pituitary releases hormones into the blood. They have a tropic or turning on effect on another endocrine organ in the body. This means they stimulate another endocrine organ to release a third hormone in the pathway, known as a peripheral hormone. This peripheral hormone travels in bloodstream to exert metabolic actions at different tissues in the body. The hormones that the anterior pituitary gland releases are the adrenocorticotropic hormone, or ACTH, or corticotropin. It plays a role in how a body responds to stress. Follicle-stimulating hormone, or FSH, stimulates sperm production in male and stimulates the ovaries to produce estrogen and plays a role in egg development in female. Growth hormone, in children, it stimulates growth. It helps children grow taller, and in adults, it helps maintain healthy muscles and bones and impacts fat distributions. Luteinizing hormone, or LH, stimulates ovulation in female and testosterone production in male. Prolactin stimulates breast milk production after giving birth. It can affect fertility and sexual functions in adults. Thyroid stimulating hormone, or TSH, stimulates the thyroid to produce thyroid hormones that manage the metabolism, energy levels, and nervous system. The posterior pituitary gland is part of the brain, and it secretes hormones directly into the bloodstream under the command of the brain. The hormones that the posterior pituitary releases are the antidiuretic hormone, or ADH, or vasopressin. This hormone regulates the water balance and sodium levels in the body. And oxytocin. The hypothalamus makes oxytocin, and the pituitary gland stores and releases it. It is for female. Oxytocin helps liver to progress during childbirth by sending signals to the uterus to contract. It also causes breast milk to flow and influences the bonding between parent and baby. In male, oxytocin plays a role in moving sperm.